You might notice a certain decor around me that I'm a little excited about. I received King's War in the mail. It's my 20th book, and it's a thick one because I write a lot of words. But it's really pretty, and I'm really proud of it. And I want to tell you how I cut 33,000 words from this monster because it was too long. Ha! Last fall, I received the content edits from my editor for the novel King's War, which is the third and final book in the Kinsman Chronicles. And it's the last book in a trilogy. There's a lot to tie up, and I had all these points of view, and I knew it was too long. Way too long. Especially for my publisher that doesn't specialize in epic fantasy. They write kind of normal length books. So they had a cap, and the cap they gave me was 180,000 words. And when I turned in the book to them and tallied everything up, the full word count was at 265,000. Yes, I'm trying to pull a Brandon Sanderson, and I didn't get away with it. My publisher said no. So I wasn't surprised when they asked me to cut some words, but when my editor asked me to cut between 40 and 50,000 words, it was really kind of sad. And I failed. But I came close. I really did. 33,000 words cut. This was partly because I had to add some stuff into the final story. There were some missing threads. I needed to cut some chapters and add some new chapters. And so that made it harder to cut all those words. But the fact that I cut 33,695 words made me dance and sing. Because I stink at cutting words. I'm terrible. There's an unwritten writing rule that says that when you rewrite a novel, you should cut at least 10%. That has never happened to me. My stories always grow. I write really sparse, rough drafts that have no description, hardly any said tags or action tags. They're just bare bones, and then I go back in and they grow. But I thought, you know what? I've got to do this. I can't let my publisher down. Which is why when I heard how much I needed to cut, it kind of knocked me flat. I'm on the floor. I work best when I have a plan, and I knew I needed a good plan if I was going to come anywhere close to cutting so many words. And I thought you might like to see how I tackled this plan. Number one, I saved as. If I was going to cut so many words, it wasn't going to happen bit by bit. I needed to take chunks out. And I'm not even talking about major book surgery. I'm talking about hacking into this poor beast with a machete. So by saving a copy, you protect yourself, then you can just tear into this other copy and not have to worry about messing it up because you've got that one right there. Number two, I made a list of scenes. Lists of scenes help me when I'm editing. I like to storyboard, but this book the storyboard was like all over my floor, and it was just too big to handle. So, and a list of all the scenes it was like 14 pages long, and that was too big to handle too. So I wanted something that would let me see the whole book at once. And so what I did was I created this little grid in Excel. I just made boxes, one sheet of paper with 12 empty boxes on it. And then I scrolled through my book painstakingly, and I wrote down the chapter number, the point of view character, and the title at the top of each box. And then I wrote down how many pages each chapter was, and I wrote down scene by scene what happened in that chapter and how many pages each scene was. That gave me a little box with the gist of what happened in that chapter, and in the end, my pages look like this. Number three, I cut 20%, in theory. Math has never been my favorite, but it wasn't too difficult to go through my chart and subtract 20% from every single page count that I had there. So I went through and I put those new 20% less page numbers there. So if I was going to try to take a 10-page chapter and make it only 8 pages, I'd write 8 and I'd put it in a circle, and I went through my whole chart and I did my little math and I had little circles of my goals. And so then, instead of the utterly horrifying goal of cutting 40 to 50,000 words from a novel, I had hundreds of tiny little goals of cutting 1 to 2 to 5 pages here and there, and that was much less overwhelming. Number 4, I made a to-do list and I added it to my manuscript. I had a pile of notes from my editor and I had a pile of notes from myself, things I wanted to make sure got put in that last novel. And I went through and with each one and decided if I wanted to keep it. And if I did, I went into the manuscript and I put a comment and I said, don't forget this. Describe castle here. Don't forget to plant the bad guy subplot. And for a bad guy subplot, it's going to be more than one place. So I'd scroll through several places in the document and I'd put a comment. add bad guy subplot, hint here, add clue here, and that would remind me as I'm going through my rewrite, oh yeah, I got to stick that in. That enabled me to get rid of a big pile of papers and throw them in the trash, which was really freeing, and just kept telling myself, you're almost there, you're almost there, you're almost done. Number 5, I cut 20%. For real. Then I started at chapter 1 and I went through bit by bit and I cut my way through the story. I cut everything I could. I especially looked for conversations that added nothing to the plot, places where characters were being too wordy. I trimmed and it was painful because I really liked some of those words that I cut. Especially if a chapter ended with like 5 lines on one page, I would go back through and just tediously scan looking for paragraphs that had a few words on one last line, and I would cut until I managed to pull those paragraphs up a line and eventually my chapter up a page. It was a tedious process, but it helped to create a really tight manuscript. Number 6, I added when I needed to. When I had to tweak things or add things, I did. I kept a spreadsheet in which I kept track of my overall word count goals, and it was always so painful to finish the day and see that I added instead of subtracted from my overall goal. And I had to add 2 new chapters at the end because it wasn't a very strong ending and I needed to end well, and it made the story better. So sometimes you have to do what you have to do, and that's why I only managed to cut 33,000. But it's how I tackled the beastly rewrite of King's War. What do you think of my process? Have you ever had to cut so many words from a story? If so, how did you go about it?